Yeah, it's fun being able to like use Go rather than just work on Go itself. I've definitely like found some parts of the standard library I'd never used before. I was like, oh, perfect, this exists. I never even knew about it.
Do you miss it?
Well, I mean, I definitely ignore a lot more bugs than I used to because now it's not my job to like stay on top of a lot of things. But I've still been going to the proposal review meetings. So in that sense, I'm still involved.
Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode Cloud servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. What up, friends? You might not be aware, but we've been partnered with Linode since 2016. That's a long time ago. Way back when we first launched our open source platform that you now see at changelog.com, Linode was there to help us, and we are so grateful. Fast forward several years now, and Linode is still in our corner, behind the scenes helping us to ensure we're running on the very best cloud infrastructure out there. We trust Linode. They keep it fast, and they keep it simple. Check them out at linode.com/changelog.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for diverse discussions from around the Go community. We've been polling the Gopher community on our Twitter account, and it turns out that many of the unpopular opinions shared on the show aren't that unpopular after all. Follow along and share your opinion in the polls. We are at GoTime FM. Will Brad Fitz break the trend and bring an actually unpopular opinion? It's time to find out. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Go Time. Shout out to our live listeners, those who always engage us as we record these shows. You do make it more fun. If you want to be part of the fun, join us in Gopher Slack. The Go Time channel is where you want to be. If you also don't know about GoTime.fm, now you do. Go check out GoTime.fm to get access to past episodes and all that good stuff. So, I'm Johnny Borsico. I will be one of your hosts today. Joining me also is Matt Ryer. Say hello, Matt.
Hello, Johnny. I don't know how to interpret that instruction because it's too cliche to make the obvious joke.
Oh.
So I kind of flipped it and went meta a little bit.
Okay.
It's not worked though, either way.
We'll we'll do what we can with it.
Great.
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
But it's great to be here. Thank you.
Good. But yeah, and we'll come back to you in a second because I have questions about your current weather situation. But yeah, we'll talk about that. But actually, today we have a very special guest on the show. It is Brad Fitzpatrick. Say hello, Brad.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So, if the name sounds familiar, maybe you are a longtime engineer and you've come across Brad's work maybe through a LiveJournal or Memcached or OpenID or Perkeep. But a lot of us in the Go community actually know Brad from his work as part of the Go team, right? Contributing to the Go Center library and being part of that really sort of a pretty incredible project, if I may say so myself. So while we're here, we'd like to really kind of have a fluid conversation with Brad, kind of maybe touching on a lot of different things, Go obviously being part of that. But I'm personally interested in kind of getting a sense of sort of Brad's journey, right? If you don't know, Brad actually has his own page on Wikipedia. To me, that's like a pretty high bar. That's like yeah. you made it.
Anyone could edit that thing though, so.
So please do, guests. I'm the most creative.
It used to say that I had 27 Boston Terrier pups, and I was like, I don't know. There was just tons of stuff that was on there over time.
Well, just random people adding, modifying it and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's my impression of what happens on Wikipedia. People come in and get bored and modify things, and other people edit it back out. But
yeah, suddenly the Earth's got 3 moons.
Oh, all right. So again, like I said, we're gonna sort of have a pretty fluid show. I am interested in sort of getting a little bit of background, perhaps the stuff that is not sort of obvious for those of us who can go to the Wikipedia page, and to sort of those of us who are familiar with Brad's work within the Go community. Brad, what do we not know about you that's not out there? Let's start with that.
I don't know. I kind of tweet my stream of consciousness, so I think most of my information is out there somewhere. I haven't been too shy on the internet, but I'm currently living in a world of smoke on the West Coast here, so it's kind of depressing looking out and seeing nothing. I haven't really left the house in a week.
That's really grim. It looks pretty terrible from over here as well. It's all over the news, of course. I hope everyone out there is staying safe.
But yeah, that's not so much about me as so much as the whole West Coast, but it's currently on my mind. But I've also been vocal about that on the internet. Turns out that the weather forecasters don't know anything about how smoke works, or how smoke affects anything else, or how smoke moves with the wind or anything. So I've been checking the weather every day, and it turns out it has nothing to do with reality. In reality, the smoke just stays.
Is that just because it's so different, so unprecedented events?
Yeah, pretty much. When something doesn't happen too often, they don't have models for it. So they just kind of assume it fits some other model, and it turns out it doesn't.
Yeah, but I'm having a problem, not quite the same, but it's very hot in London, and it was never very hot in the past, so we're not ready for it. So it's just a bit unbearable when it does spike like that. So it's kind of, I think, all related, but yeah, changing times.
Yeah.
But Brad, how did you first get into computers? When you first got into them, were you quite young when you were into them? Or?
So my dad was an electrical engineer, and he was working at a company that made memory chips in Texas. And as part of this, they would test the chips after they were made, and if a bit in the memory chip was stuck high or stuck low, I had a permanent 1 or a permanent 0 somewhere, they would toss them in this discard bin. And when the Apple II came out, my dad and some of his coworkers wanted to make a bootleg Apple II, which was pretty easy to do at the time. You can get all the parts at Radio Shack and just, sit around. They sat around soldering things for a couple of weeks. But the only real tricky bit was the ROM, which, bootleggers were passing around and stuff. So they had a copy of the ROM, but they just needed a ROM chip to burn it onto. And they worked at this company that made these ROM chips. So they went to the discard bin, and they just grabbed a handful of them, and they just flashed the Apple II bootleg ROM onto one until the stuck bits just happened to be in the right place. And
great.
So we had this bootleg Apple II that I always saw my dad screwing around on. And at some point, I was 5 or 6. He had taught me how to write BASIC. I think he wrote a program on paper. It was 10. Print Brad, or print hello world, 20 go to 10. And he's like, what do you think this does? And I was like, well, clearly it prints something on our printer. And he's like, well, no, actually it doesn't print on the printer, it prints on the screen. And I was like, oh, okay,
You were sassy for a 5-year-old, weren't you?
I don't know what I said. But it was, I do remember being confused that print didn't mean that it actually went to the printer. But
yeah, that rings a bell. I remember that. Same thing.
Yeah, there's tons of things in computers that are just not quite right, but you just accept it and you say, oh, sure, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of examples of that in the standard library as well. We can talk about those later.
Yeah.
That was shade, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I don't do shit. I don't even know what that is. I could do with some today, though.
Writing a book on the standard library's history would be fun if I had time or books paid. But it'd be fun to have a backstory on every API of the feature of why we thought it was a good idea at the time, what we were thinking. But yeah, you can't change anything.
Yeah, it's interesting though, looking at some parts of the standard library where you can see different styles of Go code being written. It's quite archaeology to go poking around.
There's whole different generations in there. And then when you make something new, you're like, well, I want it to be consistent with the old stuff in the standard library, but which generation do I want to be consistent with?
Yeah.
So
if you saw all the talk about the file system proposal that's coming out now, it's people are complaining that it doesn't have context in it. And we're like, well, yeah, but context don't really work with most operating system layers. And also it doesn't exist in the OS package, so it wouldn't compose well with that. It's just so many trade-offs all the time.
So we used to have this sort of a saying circulating around the Go community. I mean, even I've sort of uttered it on many occasions. Like, if you really want to know how Go is written, look at the standard library. But now I'm kind of hesitant on saying that because, again, if somebody doesn't know that, okay, there's multiple generations and multiple sort of best practices and things you wish you couldn't, you could go back and sort of redo because we no longer do things a certain way. It's kind of hard to tell somebody who's picking up Go today, like, hey, you just go read the standard library, right? So are there parts of the Go standard library, rather than that, you wouldn't point somebody to, but are there parts of standard library today that you definitely say, okay, this is an example of how you should write Go?
I wouldn't read like the runtime, for instance, or anything using unsafe or CGO is like pretty nasty. And even like HTTP is just full of corner cases because, the world of the internet and browsers and servers are just so bizarre and so many edge cases that the code just gets unnecessarily complex. But there's little bits and pieces. Like when I was relearning how like GIF and JPEG worked, I would it's easier for me to go read the Go implementation of some of these file formats or like, zip files or something. Rather than read the spec, you can just go read the Go code, and it's often easier to learn how a file format or a network protocol works.
Yeah, I found that. I mean, because I can read Go, I can't read whatever the specs are written in.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah.
I mean, yeah, all the RFCs have totally different styles too. So
yeah.
So one of the sort of packages that you were pretty vocal about was the NetHTTP client, and I think at some point you even had some experimentation out there about that. Like, what is the state of that? Where did you leave that?
I mean, it works. I'm not doing HTTP 3 as people always ask me. Like, if I'm going to do quick, I think I will leave that battle to somebody else with 5 or 6 years free. But yeah, quick just gets very invasive very quickly. It's nice in that it combines TLS and HTTP and TCP all like together, so the layering is nice and the layering isn't fighting each other. But it's just you're now implementing like a whole network stack and in your library.
We've got a question here in our Slack channel from Johan Brandhorst, who asks, "What's some tech that you're excited about?"
Well, I mean, I'm really into WireGuard lately, which is why I kind of left Google to go, work on WireGuard and making WireGuard fun and easy. So I don't know. I've always been like kind of so-so at networking. Like I've been like interested in networking, but I never felt like super great at it. So this is kind of a forcing function to make me actually learn how networks work.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So for those of us who don't know much about networking, like what is WireGuard, and then by proxy, like why do you care so much about it, in light of the work you're doing on Tailscale?
Well, so I always like fought networks a lot, and then I was helping my dad set up networking for it. My parents bought this RV. They're retired now and just kind of traveling around the U.S., or they were traveling around the U.S. prior to pandemics and wildfires and stuff. And they wanted to my dad wanted to have monitoring on his RV. There's this CAN bus that lets him control all the lights and fans and heaters and whatever in the thing, and also lets them see temperatures and fuel levels and what their black and water and white, clean water is all like the levels are on, all that, how long the generator's been running. So he wanted to build a dashboard to see all this, and he wanted to see it from like anywhere in the world. So we had set up this whole contraption of Raspberry Pi in the RV and LTE modem and like all these reverse proxies and stuff. And then I set up WireGuard for him. And that was just so cool and empowering compared to like the complexity of what we had been doing prior, that I just started playing with it more myself, like putting WireGuard tunnels between things. But it can get pretty tedious to like set it all up yourself. So when I found out that David Crawshaw, who was also I'd worked with on Go, was doing a company all around making WireGuard like fun and easy, I was like, I want to go do that. So I had a bunch of friends that were all kind of like doing startups at the same time, and I was getting some startup FOMO, thinking back to like the old days of me doing the LiveJournal startup. So wanted to relive the startup glory days.
And how's that working out so far?
It's fun. I mean, it'd be nice if there weren't a pandemic going on, but I had like one good month of working in person with another Tailscale person who was here in Seattle. But then after a month, it was all working at home. So, oh well. Which means I have to listen to my kids run around and scream and stuff, which is not incredibly conducive towards working.
You share sometimes some of the things that your kids say, and I find them to be hilarious. So
Oh
I
yeah,
always-
they're
I always
constant.
appreciate that on Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, they're constantly exhausting, but they're also constantly hilarious. So
Yeah, so it's worth it.
yeah, it balances out at least.
Great. That's a great advert for kids there.
Yeah.
If you're a young couple listening that are considering not sure, well, it balances out, says Brad.
I'm told it gets better, but we'll see.
Skeptical.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of hear a bit of the live journal story. You mentioned it. It's a really kind of surprising thing, I think. Could you tell us a little bit about it and your involvement?
Yeah, so I did like in high school, I did like a summer internship at Tektronix. And one of my jobs was to like work on their corporate intranet and make like a company directory online and take a bunch of their tools that were kind of like, I don't know, not online at all. I guess they were like things that didn't exist and work on their corporate intranet. And as part of that, I was running on like some commercial Unix system. I was running like, Motif as my desktop, and it was all like, 3-button mouse and like classic old school Unix. And I had access to run CGI scripts. And that was like my first time where I had like, I had access to a server that made dynamic responses to HTTP requests. And so I just went crazy and I like made their intranet do all these like, dynamic things. And then I wanted to do that myself. So when the summer before college, I started making my personal website have all this dynamic crap. And I got like a copy of Visual Basic, and I made the stupidest Visual Basic app, which was just like a single line text box that just floated up my start bar in Windows. And I could type into that single line text box. There was no button to like post. You just hit enter and you post. And it just made an HTTP request. And, I didn't call it an API for the longest time because I didn't really think of it as an API. I was like, I don't know, it just makes an HTTP request. And so everyone like downloaded this Windows program, and there was no way to post on the web even. And then later people started writing like entire paragraphs in this client. They couldn't hit enter because enter post. So they would just write this like one wall of text. And I was like, oh yeah, I didn't really put a character limit on that. But so everyone used it effectively like Twitter because they would type until they hit the edge of their screen. And then they'd be like, well, I'm out of space, I guess. So I'll hit enter. But then at some point, people started writing like big things and wanting to do paragraphs. So I put up a web page for people to post and made it a text area instead of an input box. And
now we're talking.
Yeah. And for a while, we all ran the CGI on our schools. Our school like gave us CGI access. So like we dropped a CGI file into our home directories. But then, that was too nerdy and complicated for people. So I made like a shared instance where people could create accounts. And then so then it was just like me and my friends from high school, my friends from the dorms in college creating accounts. But, their friends told their friends. And all of a sudden we're like killing my little server, and I'm begging people to send me money. In exchange for people sending me money, I put like a little thumbs up next to their name on their user profile page. It's just kind of like
the original verified.
Yeah, pretty much. And then people sending more money, and then I raised their quota as another way to thank them, like gave them more user avatar pictures and stuff. And then at some point, my mom was like, you're like taking money from people, you're taking money in exchange for goods and services. That's a business.
That's a business.
You have to like pay taxes and stuff, and people can sue you and like take all your money now. And I'm like, oh crap. So she hooked me up with like a family friend who was a CPA, and he introduced us to like lawyer types, and we made it like, an official company. So like I was legally isolated if, people were jerks, because, people are always jerks on the internet. But, so then it turned into like a company for, I guess, the whole time I was in college and a few years afterwards. And then I, sold it to a company in San Francisco because I just got burnt out running it. It was just like nonstop stress. The site was like constantly falling over. We went from like, one server to, 150 servers or so. And so we had to like invent load balancers for things and figure out sharding, which like I didn't know the name for. The name didn't exist at the time, so we called it something else. But sharding users over database clusters and doing HA databases and doing HTTP load balancers and doing a distributed file system, like was effectively S3 at the time, like for photos. But like, the site's constantly on fire, so you're constantly like writing stuff to like, Memcache came out of this because we were hitting our databases too hard. So, I mean, LiveJournal was good times because it was just like, it was fun goofing around, and it was, there's constantly something broken to fix. So
it's amazing to hear all the different types of technologies that you had to kind of innovate at a time. Yeah, it's kind of really surprising. But and now, of course, LiveJournal, it says on their website, they are now at version 427.
What?
So, that's great.
Are they version numbers? We didn't want to build all this stuff. At one point, we went to buy, we needed high availability file storage for our images and stuff. Because, we had a bunch of machines that were net booting, Pixie booting, Linux and stuff. And we're like, well, where do we store state? We have the databases for posts and stuff. But we didn't want to put all of our images in our databases because we were spinning disks at the time, and they didn't have much storage. Someone said, everyone uses NetApp. Go to NetApp and get one of their file servers or whatever. And so we talked to them. And we said, okay, we need a file server. How much? And they're like, how many users do you have? And I was like, this much. How much do you charge them? I'm like, well, this much, but not everyone pays. What percentage pay? And you can see them multiplying in their head. And they're like, okay, we'll come back to you with a quote. And this is the first time I dealt with commercial vendors, and how it just felt so scammy. And I was like, oh, you're just making up a price on the fly here. And I just got so pissed, but we had no option because we were falling over. So we paid them all this money, which I forget what it was, but it was tens of thousands of dollars for something that was okay, it kind of worked, but it wasn't amazingly performant or anything. This is all pre-SSDs and stuff anyway. So even if your software is magic, there's not much you can do if you have a couple spinning disks inside this unit. Or two. I think we got a pair for high availability reasons. But so that's what led me to go build our Moga LFS, which is an anagram of OMG files. But it was our kind of our S3 object store.
So you're creating all this tech, which is now commonplace, right?
Yeah. So so that's the other reason I kind of wanted to go do a startup. When I first joined Google, they had all this secret sauce Borg and their big table, and so there was this amazing technology. So I wanted to go to Google and see how the grown-ups did distributed systems. But now I feel all the secret sauce is out there and open source, but I've never had really a chance to use it as a at Google I had access to it, but I wasn't necessarily using it. I could just use it if I wanted, and so I used it for the Go build system and stuff. But so this is kind of my first company that I've got to do where the cloud existed, and I can use all this distributed system stuff for free, and it's great. We were setting up our proxy relays around the world for Tailscale for the people who don't have direct connectivity for I don't know, 4 or 5% of connections. If we can't penetrate the NAT on both sides, we end up proxying the encrypted packets through our relays. And we're like, okay, yeah, let's just spin up some ones around the world. And we just got a bunch of $5 a month instances in all the regions around the world. And we're like, doesn't take any time. That stuff used to be downright impossible. So it's fun. I always knew that this stuff existed, but being able to use it for the first time is pretty fun.
Yeah, it's nice to see that these things are becoming accessible, these technologies, which in the past you had to just create them, like Memcached, which we should definitely talk about more. I think it's a kind of I think it's a great way also for projects to emerge. Like you say that Memcached came out of the LiveJournal stuff. It's that thing of solving real problems and having to, like you were saying, it's on fire. So you have no choice. There are kind of imperative things. You've got to solve these problems. I find some great tech comes out of those kinds of situations.
Oh, yeah.
Do you like working in that sort of environment, or do you prefer a more relaxed where you can just take your time and design maybe?
No, I need a certain amount of stress. I mean, there's probably a limit, but if there's no stress at all, then the priority isn't so obvious. I don't do well when it's not obvious what the priority is. If I have 20 things that are all kind of equal priority, but I know I'm only going to have time to do 2 of them today, but it's just arbitrary which 2 of the 20 I pick, then I'm like, why pick anything? 18 of them aren't getting done. Why those 2? So I like a certain amount of fire so I know what to do next.
Oh.
Now, do you like the sort of the arbitrary stress, as say product teams in making arbitrary deadlines, saying, hey, we need to have a conference on this date, so we need to build this tech by that date? Or do you prefer the stuff that's being driven by customer need, like basically needing to scale?
Oh, the customer needs for sure. Like seeing people react to things, on Twitter or whatnot, to like when you launch something, that's like way more motivating than some arbitrary deadline. I mean, if it's getting things done for a conference demo or something, at least that date is real. But it's like if someone's doing a sprint and it's arbitrarily for like N weeks from now, I'm like, okay, why that Friday? Why that Thursday? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
and
yeah.
then they make you complicit by going through that estimations exercise, and then it's like, well, I'm sorry, you said it was 4 muffins, so it's 4 muffins.
I've actually never worked on a team that did any of that, so I'm kind of speaking blindly here. But I've heard people kind of talk about it, but I don't really know the process.
Oh, it's cool. It's basically abstract. You try and just have an abstract number, relative score for work. So in some ways it's nice because like you can identify big pieces of work. Usually someone on the team will know that this is a big piece of work and they can talk about it. But the trouble is obviously, it gets turned into dates and times, and then suddenly, we're all rushing and there's no really good reason for it.
What's up, Gophers? Are you looking for a way to instantly debug and troubleshoot your applications and services running in production on Kubernetes? That's a mouthful. Well, Pixie gives you a magical API to get instant debug data. And the best part is this doesn't involve changing code. There are no manual UIs, and all this lives inside Kubernetes. Pixie is an API which lives inside your platform, harvests all of your data that you need, and exposes a bunch of interfaces that you can ping to get data you need. Pixie is essentially like a decentralized Splunk. It's a programmable edge intelligence platform which captures metrics, traces, logs, and events without any code changes. And the team behind Pixie is working hard to bring it to market for broad use by the end of 2020, but I'm here to tell you how you can get your hands on the beta today. Links are in the show notes, so check them out so you can click through to the beta and their Slack community. Once again, links are in the show notes, check them out, and look forward to Pixie Day coming soon.
So obviously, well, I'm going to assume that you're using a lot of Go in your day-to-day work today.
Oh yeah, it's like 99% Go.
Mm-hmm.
We have a little smattering of other languages here and there, but.
Mm-hmm. So before Go, as Carl asked in the Go Time FM channel, what did you use primarily?
I mean, I started off like Basic and C, but neither one. Basic, you hit limits pretty quickly, and C is not very fun. It's like it exists to do things when you need to use it, but I don't like enjoy writing in C. It just feels tedious. So when I discovered Perl in like, I don't know, 93, 94 or something like this, it was like Perl 4 at the time. I was like, whoa, I can do things really quickly. But, this was like also the language everyone at the time was doing like CGI scripts in too. So it was also like the language that let me do, cool dynamic web stuff. Mm-hmm. So I was very in the Perl community, like very involved, and all of like LiveJournal was pretty much all Perl except for little bits and pieces that needed to be C for performance reasons. So like, Memcache D was originally in Perl, but it fell over within like a second, as kind of I suspected it would. Like the prototype was in Perl, but then we quickly rewrote it in C. So I love Perl, and then I never really jumped on like the Python or Ruby trains because they were just like not different enough from Perl for me to care. Like they had all the same kind of pros and cons. They weren't much better. They were still like, explode at runtime and, no type checking. And like Python and Ruby were even slower than Perl, so performance wasn't a reason. And like, maybe the syntax was a little cleaner, but like at that point I didn't care because I already knew Perl. Mm-hmm. And then I joined Google, and they use, lots of Python, C++, and Java. So I wrote in all of these kind of out of necessity, but didn't really love any of them. I worked on Android for a couple of years and wrote a lot of Java, and a lot of like Google front ends were often in Java, and Google backends were often in C++. I launched a service that was a whole mix of things. It was like Java, C++, Sawzall, which is Google's like language for logs analysis, which Rob Pike worked on prior to Go. I kind of hated it, but that's what everyone at Google wrote their logs analysis in at the time. Nowadays, they've migrated offcells all onto Go. But yeah, so I was like never really excited about any of the Google languages. I wrote them because I had to, because there was no choice. And then I saw Go come out, and I wasn't like, I went to a bunch of the internal talks on Go, and I was like, yeah, whatever. Google had a bunch of internal languages, and most of them were like so-so. So I was like not super excited at the time. And I saw somebody had a question from the audience, like, does Go have closures? You have first-class functions. And the answer was very dismissive. No, we don't. You don't need them or something. And I was like, well, okay. Like, I'm out. Like Perl had them, and I had this book, Higher Order Perl, that I really loved, that taught me a lot of what people probably would actually learn in Lisp in school or whatever. But I never really had an exposure to it until that book. And so I was like totally in love with higher order functions and stuff like that. But so when Go didn't have it, I was like, I kind of wrote it off. And also I was like, I don't really want to invest much time in another Google internal language, because I'll just leave Google at some point and I won't get to play with it anyway, and I won't get to use it for my personal projects. But then when they said they were open sourcing it, I was like, oh, I should look again. And then I noticed they had added closures in the meantime. I guess Russ Cox just went in one day when Ken Thompson was on vacation and couldn't object, and Russ just added them. But
wow,
Russ, no.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like Russ.
Oh, wow.
One of the Russes. But yeah, so then after that, I started just screwing around on it. I was spending 2.5 hours a day on the Google bus going back and forth between San Francisco and Mountain View, and I just had a lot of time to screw around on my laptop. And so I decided to, Perkeep, which at the time was called Camly Store, was originally kind of a set of ideas and kind of data structures of how I would want my personal life archiving storage system to work. But I wasn't excited to write it because I didn't want to write it in Perl. I was sick of scripting languages. I didn't want to write it in C++ because that just didn't sound fun for a personal project. And so when the Go came out, I was like, well, the best way to learn a language or learn anything new is to use it. So I was like, let's try to build this storage system idea that I've had. Let's try to write that in Go. And I found right away that the standard library was missing tons of stuff. So that's why I started sending in lots of changes. And then one day, Rob Pike was like, hey, do you want to do this full time? I was like, what? Work on a language full time? That sounds great. And it's open source. Don't have to feel bad about working for the megacorp on working on advertising. So
that's amazing. So again, a lot of those pieces of the standard library came out of things you needed.
Oh yeah. I pretty much everything that I added to the standard library was because I needed it for Perkeep or some other personal project, or sometimes people were complaining about it on a mailing list or something, but it was almost all my needs.
Yeah. See, with that, I think that's why they resonate so well. Memcache is an interesting one. Memcache D. So that project was originally C, but there is a Go version, isn't there?
Well, I mean, there's clients for every language under the sun. So,
but the original's still C.
Yeah, the server is still C.
Ah, okay.
I mean, I've written server. I've re-implemented the server in C++ inside Google. That's what the app engine. There's a version of Memcache D inside Google that is all based on Google's RPC system, Stubby, which is all protocol buffers and stuff. That it's kind of like gRPC basically, and that's written in C++, but it's not. I mean, a Memcache D server is kind of like a good hello world network server. It's very simple, right? It's a hash map hooked up to a get and set, effectively.
Well, that's kind of putting it lightly, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, because they synchronize.
I mean, the only tricky part is you want a really good memory allocator. Originally, we just used malloc, and it would work for a week or sometimes a few days, and then the CPU would go through the roof because we had all this internal fragmentation, and the memory allocator was having a hard time finding a spot to put your memory of the right size, just searching all over. So once we switched to a slab allocator, there was that Solaris paper back in the day about slab classes and stuff, and so we wrote a memory allocator inside Memcache D that bypassed your system one and just did its own malloc free, and just it only asked the operating system for 1 meg at a time, and then cut up the 1 meg itself into size specific classes. And so that was that's the only real trick inside memcached. But nowadays, all like the normal libc memory allocators do similar things. So I see.
So let's talk about that home cluster project you keep posting about. Why, first of all?
So at one point, I've gone back and forth between like, I've always had computers at home, and I've basically always had servers at home. But then at one point, I went like to full cloud. I was like, all my stuff was on the cloud, and I had VMs all over the place, and bandwidth costs were going up because, the cloud charges you way too much for bandwidth and stuff. And I woke up one day kind of like realizing I didn't understand how computers worked anymore, or like what computers cost or how fast they were, because I was so disconnected from reality and I was always using this virtual stuff. So I wanted to like build my own server again. And I think about the same time I had an internet outage at my house because I forget what I was using for a gateway, but I had like 2 or 3 gateway failures in a row where my router failed in my house, and it was super, super annoying. So I decided that my goal was going to build a high availability internet router that had no single points of failure. So I was like, well, I can't have one server. I need to have at least 3 because you need to like have, have quorum if one fails. And so I put, first I started off with VMware because I was using it at work with ESXi, but I couldn't stand how corporate-y, enterprise-y the whole thing was. So I switched to Proxmox. And so now I have just VMs that are just floating around, and I don't really know which VM is on which of the 3 nodes. And if one of the nodes dies, the VMs just float somewhere else. I use a Ceph for storage, so like the storage is sprayed over all the 3 machines too, and I don't have to worry about where my block devices are all. They're all just highly available. And my router isn't a physical piece. My router is just a Linux VM that floats around the machines too. So each one of those is plugged into, I have 3 switches, and every machine is plugged into, well, I had 2 switches at first. So every machine is plugged into both switches, and they're on different power supplies, and they have, each of the 3 machines has 2 cables, 1 to each switch. I have 2 ISPs, and it doesn't like fail over between the ISPs. All the Wi-Fi in the house is all PoE powered from the switches that are on UPS. And so the whole neighborhood could lose power, and I would still have working Wi-Fi for like an hour and a half. So this is kind of like, I did this kind of like to learn how servers worked again, and stop being so dependent on the cloud. But of course, I always build these like too complicated setups, and I forget how they work. And then I have our second child, and then I don't look at it for a year, and all my certs expired the other day, and then all my home automation stopped working because my etcd cluster was down, and all the cert, and I couldn't renew the certs because to renew the certs it needed to talk to the cluster or something, and I don't know. The whole thing's just screwed, so I want to nuke it and start over.
You need some observability, man.
So now I'm looking at like, do I want to use Flatcar Linux, like the CoreOS continuation project, or do I want to use like K3S, or maybe I just want to use Podman? And I'm kind of like debating all my options now to build like a more simple thing to run containers at my house.
It's much easier to just do it in the cloud.
I could, but like, I want to have jobs that are like connecting to security cameras and stuff and doing motion detection on live video. And if I did that over the internet connection, then like the bandwidth cost of the cloud would be stupid.
Right.
And once I have some jobs running here, I might as well run all the jobs here.
This sounds like the typical, I needed to blog more, so I wrote a blog engine.
Well, no, that's how people stop blogging. They're like, I'll start my blog again once I rewrite my blog engine, and then they never rewrite their blog engine, so they never blog. That's where I'm at. I see a question on the Slack. How do I feel about Perl 6? It's not called Perl 6 anymore. What is it called? Rakudo or something? Or
oh, really? What? How come?
They renamed it because I think the Perl 5 people were feeling hurt.
There's some story. There's some drama about that.
Perl 5 people were feeling like they were deprecated if there was a Perl with a greater number.
Well, kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh, and also I think it's called Raku now.
Is it a different team or something then?
I don't know. I think there's probably some people still staying there, but I mean, it's been going on forever now, right? I mean, it has some fun stuff, and I occasionally, I read like some of the news things that come out, the summaries of where it's at whenever I see one pop up on the internet somewhere, but I haven't used it, but I've read some of their design docs. It's, it has some cute stuff. So I bring it up sometimes in the Go proposal review meetings where I half joke that we should adopt something from Perl 6. Like I was saying, Perl 6 has the ... operator, which they call like the yada 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 operator or something, and it's like a to do, which it's a valid code. You put it in there, and so I said that in Go we should make ... as a statement just be a panic. So if you're not done writing a function yet or a method, you could just say ... and it would compile and it would run. But if it ever executed that line, it would panic and say, to do ... encountered.
Mm-hmm.
It would make a demo code on slides really cool. Like, it would be like syntactically correct code that fits on a slide.
It'd be nice if it just ended.
The program just quit?
Yeah. It's like, it's the end of the example. It's like returning from.
Oh, I thought you meant like it would just do like OSX at 0 and be like, okay, ... we're done.
We're done.
Maybe that'll work.
So we have another question here from Lewis. Worst bug or feature written in Go by you?
The my multipart package, it took us like 5 tries to get that right. Me and Andrew Durand wrote it originally when he was in San Francisco. And I don't know, like we had gone out to brunch in the morning before we made it. So we've always blamed the mimosas for like the poor quality. Yeah. But it must have been something else because it was really bad for a while. We just kept finding bugs in it. But I think it's pretty solid now. But whenever I see that package, I kind of cringe and I'm like, oh, right, that one.
Yeah. It's a complicated thing, but the interface is simple. Did that evolve over time?
No. We can't change the interfaces.
Oh, I see. You mean this was for the V1 release even?
Pretty much. I mean, it was early enough that it basically didn't change. It was just the implementation that was tricky to get right.
Well, thanks for doing it, though, because we can just use that now and it works.
Yeah, well, Yeah. Until people find bugs and edge cases in it, but yeah, it mostly works.
That's all right. Can't worry about that, can you, too much?
How do you feel about sort of so there's always this back and forth between certain community members around sort of adding new features to Go, right? And the hot new thing right now is sort of the debate going on with the generics proposal, right? So which kind of seems like it's on its way in, right? I'm curious how you feel about sort of introducing these kinds of features in Go, and do you also share the sort of the feeling that Go is kind of good enough as is, right? And introducing these things is going to add unnecessary complexity. Like, where do you stand on that?
I'm pro generics for sure. I know there's some community division on this, but I think it will help. I mean, there will people will abuse it because people abuse anything, and there will be bits and pieces of code here and there that are disgusting. But I think by and large, it'll make most code more readable. Maybe some of the implementations of these things, like if someone makes like some generic data structures, it might be really hard to read some of this code. But like most of the code that you're reading that uses these packages, like uses some tree type or some hash map type, should be better code than exists today. There should be fewer empty interfaces and stuff like that. So I think that'll be good. I'm still disappointed in how error handling turned out. And it seems like the whole Go team has kind of given up on trying to address error handling at this point because it's just all the previous efforts have kind of failed. And it was so hard to get those previous error handling proposals out, and they were so poorly received. And I feel like they just don't want to try anything at this point because there's no ideas. Nobody has any new ideas, and it's so contentious in the community that like nobody has the energy to just deal with it. And so I don't know. I kind of think that Go's popularity, it helps helps it be more popular, but I think it hurts in that it's now too hard to change the language because there's just too many vocal opinions out there. And so like in the early days, Go could change quickly because nobody cared. But yeah, the Go uncompatibility thing is a blessing and a curse.
It's a blessing for us as users of it.
Yes and no. I mean, like, if we were allowed to like change the standard library and make it like clean and consistent, then you wouldn't see these like 3 or 4 generations of styles in the standard library, right? We could put context everywhere, or we could, build context into the language and then make it implicit or something.
Just do a Perl 6 and make a new language with a different name.
Well, yeah, we see how that worked out for like Python 3 and Perl 6, right? So in practice, these things don't work. Like Ian wrote a whole document about like all the languages, and the successful ones are the ones that don't nuke the world and start over. So you got to find a way to do it iteratively.
How do you manage sort of your modules? That's another point of contention within the Go community, right? So like basically, how do we manage the introduction of Go modules and sort of the semantic import versioning and all that stuff? Like, I'm curious what you feel about it, if anything, right? Do you just say, okay, well, we're going to be at V1 forever because we don't want to have a V2, or how do you treat that?
Well, it's easier to be at V0 forever. Then you don't have any rules.
Right.
So never release. Is your
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah, it works.
You'd be happier.
I mean, it depends who your audience is. Like, if you're writing stuff for yourself, it's easier to just stay at V0 forever, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I honestly haven't had to deal with doing any of the V2 stuff. So I see a lot of people complaining about the semantic import versioning, and I could probably believe it, but I just haven't used it enough to feel the pain.
Yeah, I haven't. My packages just stay simple. I don't have a version 2.
Crickets.
Don't worry about the silence. Brad, you don't have to feel bad after I say a joke. It's okay for it to just be an awkward silence. Because they cut it out, you see.
You hope.
I hope.
What's up, Gophers? Do you have an app in production that's slower than you like? Of course you do. I know. But seriously, is the performance of your apps all over the place? Sometimes fast, sometimes slow? Do you even know why? Well, with Datadog, you will. You can troubleshoot your app's performance with end-to-end tracing, and in one click, correlate those Go traces with related logs and metrics. You can also use Datadog's detailed flame graphs to identify bottlenecks and latency in your apps. Start tracking the performance of your apps today with a free trial at datadog.com/GoTime. And here's a bonus. If you sign up for a trial and install the agent, Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. That's a nice bonus. Once again, datadog.com/GoTime.
Well, it's that time again. I think it's time for unpopular opinions.
I actually think you should probably leave.
I was hard pressed to think of one, but then I just saw this Twitter discussion going by again where I feel like every year or so there's like a Twitter fight about whether HTML is a real programming language or not, with the real in quotes. And like, all these people fight about it, and it doesn't seem like too worth fighting about it. One camp is like, oh, it doesn't have conditions, it's really just a markup language, not a programming language. And other camp is like, no, don't belittle new people that are just getting started. You should encourage them. But like, I'm kind of pretty firmly in the camp that it's not a real programming language, but that doesn't matter. You're still a nerd, like typing stuff into a computer. And like, once you're typing nerdy, arbitrary stuff into a computer, it's not a small jump at that point. It's like a tiny step towards learning a real programming language that has if. So, I don't know. But I only thought of that because I just saw it again going by. And it seems like, sacrilegious to say that HTML is not a real programming language, but I will say it.
That's definitely going to get your Wikipedia page trashed.
Yeah, totally.
And they'll probably do it using HTML.
You're all my nerd friends, even if you just do HTML. You're still a nerd.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I think that's it. That's the nice thing, because that's what people mean, isn't it? They're moaning that, we're belittling these noobs that are learning just HTML, bless them.
Yeah, are you a real programmer if you only do HTML? Yeah, it's like there's so much identity associated with that,
Yeah, so any others? Johnny, you haven't given one for ages, mate.
Well, that's because I haven't been around for ages, remember? Like, I haven't been around for like 3 or 4 shows, man.
Yep.
Someone asks.
So you admit
It's like,
it.
yep.
So do one.
Well, I don't know. Like, sounds like Brad wanted to add some flavor.
No, I was just going to say, I'll question Go by if I wanted to remove something from Go, what would I remove?
Ooh.
I think I would remove complex numbers.
Ooh, say more.
I think I filed a proposal about this a while back. Because it turns out nobody uses them. And if anyone does use them, I think we should have like operator methods instead, so you can define complex numbers as a type and still be able to use like, normal math operators on them with like the usual precedence. And then maybe some of the Go num people would be happy too.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I've never used it. I think you might be right. I don't know who uses it. I just stick to simple numbers. I stay away from the complex ones. Don't need them.
I think that the legend goes that like Ken Thompson was very convinced that any modern language needed them because some other language had them. So they added them, but then no one uses them. So I don't know.
That's so interesting that it's sort of very personal kind of opinions that end up, they lead to decisions that then now, because Go's grown so much, we sort of see at scale. So it's really interesting hearing about some of those little just discussions that people have, and it turns into something into the language that we then all are using every day.
Or not using.
Or not using it.
It's all. I mean, it's kind of all personal preference, right? I mean, if someone says, okay, well, any sufficiently modern programming language needs to have complex numbers, one could make the same argument for generics, right? Well, wasn't generics part of the V1, right? So it's preference at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, I have to agree. I've never used them. I think you have to be doing some like a particular kind of work to need them, right?
Yeah, but someone was telling me that even the people that typically need them, there's faster ways to do it without them or something. So like a lot of people working in the math fields where you would think that they would make sense don't. What was it? Like rendering like the Mandelbrot set is always like a classic example of when you need it. And then people were like, well, actually, there's faster ways to do the Mandelbrot set without them, blah, blah, blah. So.
Oh, well.
That doesn't sound like people on the internet.
Apparently I say GIF or GIF wrong.
Oh, yeah, I meant to come back to that. So, yeah, I have a bone to pick with you.
If I recall, like one of the specs actually had the pronunciation in the spec, and it was GIF, wasn't it?
Don't know.
Well, I mean...
Johnny, this could be a new regular part of the show where we make a jingle and we'll do GIF versus GIF. Just find out.
Yeah. I don't know. I've gone back and forth, honestly, and I don't know. I guess today I'm feeling like GIF, but
I didn't know it had it in the spec. That changes things.
The spec was called like GIF 89.text or something, like all caps. Now I'm trying to find it.
But how did it spell it? You just read it like that, Brad. Just says it's pronounced GIF.
No, it's not in the 89A spec.
I can't believe we're doing this.
This is what I thought a podcast with Brad would turn into.
Didn't it?
It's not in that spec.
Oh man, we can't help ourselves.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. I'm sure about this, but memory.
And so I just want to tell us quickly about Tailscale, because I'm aware of this, but I'd love to hear a bit more about it.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have a great elevator pitch, which is maybe a problem for a company, but
Private networks made easy.
Yeah, that works. So we're reluctant to call it a VPN because VPN has all these like kind of different meanings to different people, because people hate their corporate VPNs and they hate, the personal VPNs are often very shady, like people trying to hide their IP address while they're downloading, torrents or something like that. And the company is really logging all their stuff and reselling it. So it's like, so yeah, VPNs are kind of like, people have lots of opinions about that term, and we're kind of a VPN, but instead of like proxying or sending all your stuff and encrypting it to like a hub and spoke, it's all kind of like it. Basically, you put Tailscale on all your devices, and then they join a network together, and then so all your devices can reach all of each other. So they get a new IP address that is your Tailscale IP address, and then anything with Tailscale then can contact anything else with Tailscale, for your network that you create. And all WireGuard to each other, and it does peer-to-peer, so it won't like go through our servers. and it'll get through all your NATs and stuff. So it'll all do the NAT traversal and all the firewall punching tricks. And if something like a couple % of connections that can't penetrate the NAT end up getting proxied through relays we run, but we can't see the traffic. We're just moving UDP packets around that are all WireGuard encrypted already, and we don't have the keys. So it's fun. It's like networking gets stupid easy at that point, because you get a connection and by its IP address exactly who it is. So you can do like old school host-based authentication again. You don't have to deal with cookies or logins or whatever. It's like exactly which device and user that connects to you. So So companies are replacing their corporate VPNs with this, and I don't know, kind of great.
Yeah.
And it'll find the shortest path. So if you have your office is split between the West Coast and East Coast, and your employees are roaming around back in the days when employees could roam around and take flights and stuff, you would just connect via the shortest path, and you wouldn't bounce around the country, proxying packets around. So
does it use the packages from the standard library then?
Or yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly things we've had to write, but it uses a lot of the standard library. Yeah, and pretty much all of our code is open source. The GUIs for Windows and iOS are not open, for instance, but you can run it in Homebrew or whatever on Macs and stuff, just without the GUI.
Very cool. And we'll put a link to it in the show notes for anyone interested in checking that out.
Yeah, it's fun being able to use Go rather than just work on Go itself. So
yeah,
I've definitely found some parts of the standard library I'd never used before. I was like, oh, perfect, this exists. I never even knew about it.
Yeah. Well, do you miss it? Do you miss working on the Go project at Google sort of more officially, or has nothing changed for you?
Well, I mean, I definitely ignore a lot more bugs than I used to, because now it's not my job to stay on top of a lot of things. But I've still been going to the proposal review meetings, so in that sense, I'm still involved. So I think I'm the first non-Googler to be part of the proposal review meetings now.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah,
yeah. So do you think they'll listen to you if you disagree with something or propose something?
They're not very contentious meetings. So I mean, kind of by definition, things go in once they've had consensus. So if anyone disagrees with something and is has a strong opinion, everything kind of stops while people figure out why someone has a strong opinion about something. So
yeah. Be interesting to listen into one of those meetings, Brad. Would you be willing to wear a white?
Could ask Russ. That could be a good way to get kicked off of him. I don't know. We have discussed at times, making them open or broadcast or recorded somehow. But it's more of a logistics issue. But I suppose we should revisit that.
Because it does feel like a little bit of a sort of behind closed doors kind of discussion, right? For something that affects the entire community. I'm not saying that, not putting that sort of dark cloud on it, but it just, if it's closed and the decisions made during that meeting are the start of new directions, it could feel like that for some.
Yeah, so we did change the procedure, I don't know, a few months back, so now there's minutes kept for all of them, and no decision is made in a single meeting. So it now takes 2 weeks or a month, depending on the type of issue. And we announce our decisions ahead of time. And only once a whole meeting has gone by with no new data and an assumed direction has already been picked, this is tentatively accepted or tentatively declined. Then once another week goes by with no new input, then we say, okay, marking it accepted, marking it approved. So if you're not in the meeting, you still know that the decision is coming, and it gives you a chance to object and to raise new information. So we stole this from the Rust community, who had a blog post about how it works in their community. Mm-hmm. It has some name, but I'm forgetting the name now. It's called No New Information or something like that.
That's an interesting title for a thing.
Yeah, I'm probably screwing it up.
That's all right. But they aren't deaf to the or they aren't ignoring the community. They still feedback from the community still feeds into those meetings, doesn't it?
Oh, I mean the community or the meetings are entirely in response to issues filed by the community. I mean, occasionally one of us will file our own issue that then we discuss, but And in the past, they've been pretty good about trying to bow out of the kind of the voting or discussion on things they've done themselves. Like, I forget which proposal it was, but a while back, Russ filed a big proposal, and he kind of recused himself from the decision making on it. He's like, I don't want to look like I'm just approving my own thing.
That's very honourable of him.
He's an honourable chap.
He is, yeah.
So have you introduced your kids to programming yet? Someone from the Slack channel wants to know.
My older one is 3 and the younger one is 1, so it's not quite there.
Might be a little old, tad bit early.
In a couple years, yeah.
Could start them off with Ruby.
No, I've been debating a lot what I'm going to do when the time comes. You know, it has to be like engaging enough. You know, it has to be contemporary somehow. Like, I don't think giving him a Apple II terminal would be quite so exciting. Lego might be fun. Lego, you know, the little turtle graphics is always fun.
If I had a kid, I would bring it up kind of in the same time scale that I brought up. So, you know, it'd have a Spectrum first. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can learn on that. And just because I don't think kids appreciate how good technology is. And, you know what I mean?
There's a guy online. He said when his kid reached a certain age, he could have a certain video game console. And I think he got him every one that had ever come out in order, and he made them use it for like 6 months or something. So he could play like Pong or whatever with like the little silly paddle thing for like 6 months. And then he could advance to the 8-bit games and like the Sega and so he could like see progressions of like decades of game consoles getting better.
That's brilliant.
And so I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's basically my idea, but with some level of commitment.
Yeah.
Which is obviously...
Yeah, like, you know, finding all these machines that still work on eBay or whatnot seems like a challenge.
Yeah, but it's so fun. It's funny, I'm quite nostalgic for that old tech. I actually miss when computers were rubbish, you know? I miss the time when the computers were just like terrible graphics, really slow. You know what I mean? I'm kind of nostalgic for those times, that's all.
They also, I mean, computers used to be faster in a lot of ways. Applications used to be faster than web things are today.
Yeah, we don't care anymore. We just say, hey, just throw some, SSDs at it or something.
There was a person a while back who analyzed keyboard input latency from old machines to modern machines and just showed how, like, computers nowadays, you hit a key and the time it takes to show up in Gmail or whatnot takes forever.
Oh, really? Yeah.
You know, keyboard latency, display latency, operating system latency.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, I think, it'll be, well, along those lines, about teaching kids to learn to appreciate tech. It would be kind of hard to say, here, child of mine, carry around this rotary dial phone before I can give you a smartphone, right? It might be hard to go to school with that, but,
Yeah. But at least make them have a landline, though, for a bit first. And then be like, right, now, watch this. Then you can cut the wire. And it was just, all along, it was just an iPhone sellotaped to an old phone. And you're like, look at this. We blow the tiny minds. We did that, I think.
So I found a landline recently, and I was like, I want to make this do silly things again. And I used to do silly things with Asterisk back in the day, like, controlling a little PCI card that, like, did the tone or whatever and made phones ring. And so I went to, like, look at Asterisk again after not using it in almost 20 years. And I was like, it's basically the same. Some things are kind of changed. And I found some blog post that was like the history of like how this AGI, this Asterisk Gateway Interface, which is like CGI for phones or whatever, how it changed over time. And there were 3 generations of things, like the AGI and then something else. And now they have ARI. And it was kind of like these were the mistakes that were made. And here's what we learned over time. And it was kind of cool to see a project that felt like I just used yesterday, but it had really been 20 years. And I found this retrospective post about like, yeah, we made all these changes. And I was like, wow, it's kind of cool to watch a project and fast forward like that.
Yeah, fast forward. That's it. You could fast forward the kids as well. Could be like, right, you've been good this week. So now suddenly 64K. You know what I mean? It's like, good boy.
You get more memory. You get more graphics.
Yeah. Graphics cards now exist. Just like milestones in tech as rewards for kids. I don't know. I mean, I just thought of it today, but I am going to get a domain name as soon as I can for it. It's the first step.
All right. So this has been pretty epic and pretty fun. It's been a great joy and a pleasure having you on the show, Brad, and great participation from our folks in the GoTime FM Slack channel as well. Hopefully they gotten all their questions answered, and we're going to see some updates on your Wikipedia page very soon here. Yeah, that GIF and GIF thing, I don't know, man. Anyways, it was a pleasure having you, and we'll see you next time on the GoTime podcast.
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks.
Comment on this and every episode of GoTime on changelog.com. There's a discussion link in your show notes for easy click-ins. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter. We are at GoTime FM. This episode was hosted by Johnny Borsico with Matt Ryer. It was produced by myself, Jared Santo, and our music is provided by the Beat Freak, Breakmaster Cylinder. Shout out to all of our longtime sponsors. Thanks again to Fastly, Linode, and Rollbar. Mark Bates is back on the panel next week, and they're talking all about teaching Go, so stay tuned for that.